So for this final video in Intro to Web Design, I wanted to talk about some of the next steps. And these aren't things that you're necessarily going to do in this class, but I just wanted to present to you how the web design workflow and the mobile design workflow works these days, especially if maybe you did web design 10 years ago. It's very, very different. Before, whenever I first started as a web designer, I mostly worked in Photoshop, and I used what were called slices to kind of cut up the page in Photoshop, and that would generate a bunch of code that you would then send to a developer, or if you were a developer yourself, you would use that code as a starting place, and you would make your website. There were other people that would work 100% from code first, and then would start to design things in Photoshop or Illustrator and create graphics that they would incorporate. Now it's very, very different, especially if you're working at a web design studio or an advertising studio that incorporates web design. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. And again, these aren't things that you're doing in this class. I just want to give you that career experience. So I have my design in our Adobe XD project. Depending on where you work, they use different programs. Some use Adobe XD. Adobe XD I think is really good to learn on, and it's free, so that's why I teach it personally. But there's also software called Sketch. Sketch is probably more of the industry standard, and it works almost exactly the same as Adobe XD. You could learn Sketch in an afternoon, similar to how you can learn XD very, very quickly. But Sketch is basically the same thing. So you make your prototype, and I've made my prototype in XD. It all works. It all looks good. And then what you do is this is either a video of you interacting with it, or whenever you share it, you send this to someone. So I'm going to prototype this real quick. You would send this to a developer, and that developer would use that as kind of their starting place. So let me just mark this as the home page. And we have a bunch of different publishing options. So let's publish the prototype first. Okay, so let's create a public link. So our public link has been created, and basically we would send this to a client to get their feedback, or I would send this to my boss or whatever, my director, and they would give me feedback. They can make little comments here and there. I'll comment as a guest, but you can make little annotations and things like that. And so they might give you, okay, well, this needs to change, or let's work with this font. But basically, you would get a lot of feedback. You'd go back and forth and do it over and over again, keep making this, keep developing it, getting it better and better. And then eventually, once you've settled on a solid plan, that's whenever you might publish the design specs. And the design specs are basically going to give the specific code information, such as the CSS styles and the positional placement of different elements, to your front-end web developers, so to those people that know HTML and CSS. If you take front-end web development in this course program, then you're going to learn how to do all of this, all of the actual development part. So this class is kind of the design class, right, where you're just learning the design basics and the visual elements and the interactive elements. The next class, front-end web development, is really the code part of it. So we have our link for our design specs. I'm going to copy that, and I'll paste it and go there. And the design specs are going to look very similar to basically the basic XD page. But what you can do here is whenever you select something, it gives you the dimensions of this text. It tells you the distance from the different sides, how many pixels it is, the appearance, the different styles that are being applied, all kinds of things, the actual content itself. So this is so valuable if you're a web developer. It's telling you all of the information that you need to know to actually place these elements. We worked with a little bit of HTML and CSS in this class. I just wanted to introduce you to the ideas. And so this is just kind of showing you, the dimensions, the placement, and everything else. It's really great. So I can use this. Okay, this bit right here is basically a style guide. This is basically a CSS style that it's telling me. Here's the fonts, the leading, and all these other kinds of things like that. So you might send that page to a developer, and they would go through and mark everything and start to actually get it built in HTML and CSS. The other thing you might do, and this is more for mobile development, but it's also used in web development, is use a program called Zeppelin, which is an intermediary program. So Zeppelin, it's free. If you have one project, if you have more, you have to pay for it. But it's compatible with a bunch of different pieces of software. What you do is you select an artboard, you select Zeppelin under File Export after you've installed it, and then it pulls it into Zeppelin. So we have this artboard selected. Let's actually grab this one instead. And we go File, Export, Zeppelin. It's going to say OK. I say Allow. I'll say that's fine. And it may have some little hiccups here, but it's going to pull in all of this information and generate the HTML code for me and the CSS code. All right, so it pulled in this screen. So it's giving me those same things, right? Those dimensions that we saw in our design specs over here, but it's also giving me the full CSS. So I could literally copy this CSS code and it's going to make this custom class for me, and I can paste it into my CSS file. Zeppelin is really terrific, especially if you have interactions on a mobile application that you've made. It can go directly to Swift, which is the language that iOS apps use, or Kotlin/Java, which is what Android uses. So this is a really great option using Zeppelin to basically, develop your page for you. So we've created the colors and everything else, and look, they're coming in exactly right, how they should, as CSS items for our project. So on this right-hand tab, we have the style guide. Whenever I click the style guide, as I start adding styles, they'll appear in this CSS sheet, and I can just copy this whole page. So for instance, if I select this and I go over here and I click this little plus right here, this little AA plus, that's going to add a font style or a text style, and then this will add a color. So let's see, this is a different color, so if I add that, and what this is doing is it's generating this whole style guide for me that is really cool. It's basically building a CSS page for me. So it just built this over here on the side. As we create buttons and things like that, we can select them and turn them into components as well. So Zeppelin is really powerful, and then this can all be published and it can generate our CSS or HTML page. So at that point, that would get sent to a developer, or if you're the developer, you would use that. And you would share this with the other developers. You would all work on getting this site functional and doing the things that you want. You would incorporate JavaScript for animations. And once it's all built, if you had like users, you would incorporate some sort of form system and some sort of user management system. And once all of that's made, then you would upload your site and publish it, and send it to the client again. So that's kind of the next steps here. Is I just want to get you used to the idea of XD and Sketch and all these other softwares are really prototypes that you're building, and you're spending a lot of time making the designs here, and then the code will actually become a lot easier once you have built your design beautifully. You can pull it into either the XD code reviewer or the code reviewer like Zeppelin, and you can use that to really generate websites quite easily. There's other extensions that will try to make HTML pages based on your XD projects. Honestly, it's better just to kind of do those by hand. Using the CSS styles is a little different than relying on the HTML that's generated. It's usually not the best. So keep that in mind, that there's going to be some adjustment time and some things that you have to do manually. So if you enjoyed this class, I hope that you take front-end web development and learn the kind of nuts and bolts of code. In that class, we're going to cover HTML, CSS, JavaScript, jQuery, and some other things like Angular that are really powerful tools to become front-end web developers, which is one of the most in-demand jobs that you can have. Additionally, if you were really into this class, think about taking patterns in application design and that whole series of courses which use XD and instead focus on mobile app development. So building applications that are going to be on iOS or Android. So anyways, I hope to see you in the future classes and hope that you've enjoyed Intro to Web Design.